Hello, and welcome to our tutorial on TrapTagger's user schema. In this video, we are going to cover topics such as the different types of account in TrapTagger, how to manage the members of your organization and the level of access they have to your data, as well as the sharing of data between organizations. So I want to kick things off with a bit of an introduction, and that's to say that there are two types of account in TrapTagger: organization accounts and user accounts. The idea is that organizations own data, whereas users annotate and generally interact with that data. Users can be members of multiple organizations with differing levels of access to those organizations' data. Organizations can share data between one another, and in general, the idea is that organizations own the data, so that as team members come and go, that data remains with that organization for the long term. So to walk you through all this and how to do all the management side of it, we're going to switch over to my screen here. And basically this is now the homepage of TrapTagger, where you can see your surveys that you have access to. And this is my user account, where I am a member of two different organizations: Wildlife Conservation and a fictional organization called Wild Parks. So we can see I've got this survey here called Kwaluzi. It's owned by Wildlife Conservation, Forest and Gamo, which is also owned by Wildlife Conservation, and then Delta A, which is owned by Wild Parks. So the way we look at and manage permissions and all those sort of things is to go to the permissions page. So we can see it in the navigation bar at the top here. Simply click permissions. So that takes you to the permissions page. And what's worth noting here is that everybody has access to their own permissions, which is this first first tab here. But the other tabs are for general admin purposes, and so only admin accounts have access to those. So if you don't see them, that's why. So starting off with my permissions, we can see, as I said earlier, that I'm a member of two organizations called Wild Parks and Wildlife Conservation. We can see the level of access I have to those organizations, and we can see I am an administrator for both of them with full access. So the way permissions are handled in TrapTagger is that a user has a default level of access to an organization's data. So that applies to all new surveys, old surveys. Generally, that's your level of access. Then on top of that, you can set up survey level exceptions to that access, and we'll cover that in a bit more detail shortly. But in terms of the levels of access, they are covered in this slider here, from the lowest level of access up to the highest level of access. So starting on the low end, a worker is someone who can only access annotation jobs. They don't access any data. All they can do is see images and annotate them. Level up from that is hidden access, and that means you can't see any of the data sets owned by that survey. That'll make a bit more sense in terms of the context of exceptions, and we'll get to that shortly. The next level up is read access, read-only access, and that means you're able to look at the data in a data set. You can download CSVs, you can download the images, you can view the images, you can do all that, but you can't edit or change that data set in any way. The next level up is write access, which is where you're now able to start changing that data set. So with the exception of these extra permissions here, you're able to do everything else. You're able to add new annotation sets, add labels, edit labels, launch annotation tasks, all those sorts of things. The next level above that, and then the highest level, is administrator access. And that's where you're able to now administer the sharing of data between that organization with other organizations, as well as manage the members of that organization and their access. So that's that. Then you've got some extra access or permissions that can be switched on or off. So we've got firstly annotation access. That's whether you're allowed to do manual annotation jobs for that organization, and whether they appear for that organization in their job list. We've got survey creation permission. That's whether you're able to create new surveys, new data sets for an organization. And then deletion. That's whether you're allowed to delete surveys and annotation sets for that particular organization. This last column here for root user, the idea there is that each organization has when an organization account is created, a root user is created for that organization as well, and that essentially should be used as sort of the backdoor key into the organization, sort of as a last resort. So all the administrators should sign up and get their own administrator accounts, and then you've just got the root user as sort of a last resort. So you can't actually change who is the root user. This just indicates to you with you're logged in as the root user for that organization. So those are my general permissions, and then we've got permission exceptions. So basically the idea is, as I mentioned earlier, that you can have exceptions to your default access on a per survey basis. So the idea for the best example would be, for instance, if you've got a student who's needing to do some work to analyze a particular data set or two, and you don't want them to have access to all the other data. So you'll then give them hidden access so that they can't actually see any of your surveys, and then you specifically give them read-only access to the individual data sets they need. And in that way, you're able to just give them the bare minimum access that they require to sort of keep things secure. So yeah, I think that is everything I need to show on that tab. So we can now move on to the next tab. And so that's now, these are now the start of all these sort of administrative functions. So now this is where you can administer the members of your organizations for which you're an admin. So remember, I'm an administrator for two organizations in this case, Wild Eye and Wild Parks. So we can see here in this table all members of both of those organizations, so all user accounts under my purview. And so we can see we've got Marguerite, who's a member of Wild Parks with read-only access and general annotation access. We have Mark, who's a member of Wild Eye Conservation with hidden access and then annotation access as well. We then have myself, who's a member of both Wild Eye Conservation and Wild Parks, with administrator access for both. And so what's also worth pointing out is that you'll see there that these edit buttons are not available. Administrators cannot have any survey exceptions. So by default, administrators have full access to all the data for an organization. So also, we've got the emails for those users so that you can email anybody if you need to make contact with them as necessary. So in general, the idea is when you want somebody to join your organization, you ask them to first sign up for a user account. So they must go to the TrapTagger website, go to the login page, and there you'll see a link that says sign up as a user. You go there, you then fill in a form that literally is just a username, a password, and an email address. That'll then send a verification email to that email address with a link. Follow that link, and then you verify your email, and it creates your account. Then the administrator can go to add invite user, select for which organization they would like to add them. So obviously, if you're an admin for multiple organization, which user are they? Which organization are we trying to add them as a member of? So you can select, in this case, Wild Parks or Wild Eye Conservation, and then enter in that person's username and click send, and that will then send them a notification with their little bell there, and that will then ask them whether they would like to be a member of your organization or not, and they can either accept or reject that invitation. So yeah, and then when they're added, they'll be added at the lowest level of permission possible. So they'll be work level permission, so that you can then come back afterwards and then upgrade them to what level of permission you need them to have. And so to show you sort of how that works, we've got Mark. We can perhaps upgrade him to read access. So you just simply click or move the slider to what level of access you want, and then switch on or off whatever type of access you want. So maybe switch off their annotation access, and then you'll see what actually happens is you'll get notifications about that. So all affected parties will receive a notification letting them know what's happened. So affected parties will be the person whose permissions have changed, as well as all the administrators of that organization, so that they know what's going on. So you can see here, we've got some notifications, and we can see, for instance, that the annotation permission for Mark has been set to false for wildlife conservation. So now everybody who's an administrator will know what's going on, and so will Mark, and that's the idea. So we'll close that and close that. We can also set up permission exceptions for users, so you simply click edit. Mark's already got a survey permission exception, but we can add another one. You just select which survey you would like to give them permission for, and you can then set up specific exceptions for that. And again, save that. It'll send out notifications to Mark, as well as all the administrators of wildlife conservation, to let them know that permissions have changed for the organization, and so then they've got different access. And then lastly, you can obviously then remove a user from an organization, and then they'll no longer have access to your data. Okay, I think that's all we need to cover here, so I'm going to move on to the next tab. But to facilitate some further points I want to make and some things I want to show, I'm actually going to downgrade my permission for wild parks down from administrator. So there I am, Nicholas, with admin access. I'm going to take that, I'm going to drop myself down to hidden access. So this is, so don't get confused going forward, just it's quite simple now. I'm still a member of both organizations, but I'm an administrator for only wildlife conservation now. It's just going to make things a bit easier going forward for the demonstration. Okay, so now we can move on to the data sharing side of things. So we're going to start off with the data shared tab. So this is our data that we have shared with other organizations. So here we can see all the data sets that any organizations that I'm an administrator of that have been shared with other organizations. So we can see, for example, that a data set called Forest and Gummo that is owned by Wildlife Conservation has been shared with Wild Parks, and then also again the email address of the root user there, so that you're able to make contact with them as necessary. You'll see that there are two levels of access with which you can share data sets. The first is read-only access, and the second being write access. So read-only access is the same as user-level read-only access, in that you're only allowing them to read the data set. They can't change it anyway, so they can view the images, download the CSVs, download the data set, do all those sort of things. They can't annotate it or change it in any way. And that also includes in terms of actual annotation access. So none of the organization that you're sharing it to, none of their members can actually annotate any jobs for that data set because they only have read-only access. The second level of access is write access, and that's again the same as write access for an organization, for a user. But with the difference being that now, firstly, that now will allow them to annotate jobs for that data set, but also the second thing being that they won't be able to delete it. So only the people in the organization that owns the data set can delete the data set or any of the annotation sets associated with it, and also they won't be able to share it. So only the original owners of the data set can share it with other organizations. I think that's all the points there. And then, of course, you can then also remove any shares that you've had historically. And again, also, all you need to do to be able to do that is simply click Share Survey, enter the name of the organization with which you'd like to share that data set, and then select the data set you'd like to share as well as the access level, and then click Share. That'll then send a notification to the administrators of that organization, where they'll be able to decide and choose whether they want to accept that survey or not. And then again, all the administrators of your organization and that organization will receive notifications informing them of what's going on. And then lastly, moving on to the data received. So this is now just the opposite end of what we just saw, and these are now the data sets that have been shared with us or shared to any organization for which you are an admin. So we can see there's a data set called Delta A that has been shared with Wildlife Conservation from Wild Parks. Again, you can see the email of the guys at Wild Parks so that you're able to contact them if necessary, and then the level of access that they've given us to that data set. What's also worth pointing out is that the share access level is essentially a maximum access level. So if you've shared a data set with another organization with right level access, their users with read-only access will still only have up to read-only access on their data set. They just can't have a higher level than what the share level access. And then lastly, you can obviously then just remove any shared data sets. You can remove them as well. So yeah, that's basically the permissions page. We can now go back to the service page and see some other things. So again, if you remember, in the beginning, I was an administrator of both organizations, and now I've set my access to hidden for Wild Parks, meaning I don't actually that my access levels, no longer admin. Now, Delta A has been shared with Wildlife Conservation with read-only access. So, because I'm an admin of Wildlife Conservation, I have a maximum read-only access of that data set. So we can see what that looks like, and essentially, let me just move it higher up so we can see it better. But essentially, you can see now I can't edit the survey, I can't launch it for manual annotation, I can't do anything like that. All I can do is look at the results, explore it, do all those sort of things. You can see they're there. And for example, now if I try and explore that data set, you'll see I won't have any labels available to me. I can't edit the labels on this data set. And then lastly, it's also just worth pointing out the way this sort of works with survey creation. If you're a member of multiple organizations, if you click new survey, you can see then you can actually set which organization you want that survey to belong to. So if you remember an admin with creation permission on multiple organizations, you select which organization the data set belongs to. And then thereafter you can then also set the permissions for the members of that organization. So you can tell it to just leave the default access for all the members and default annotation access. But then you can also actually, for instance, say like the default access for all the members, all the non-admin members, except the person who's creating this data set, will have hidden access. They won't be able to see the survey that you're creating. So if it's a more sensitive data set, it can remain hidden from all the users in the organization, and then also, for instance, say no annotation access, so they don't see that. And then on top of that, you can add extra exceptions. You can then say a specific user, say Mark, can have, let's say, read-only access with annotation rights, and then they can do what they need to do. And that's just for your initial setup, just so that when the survey is created, your permissions are correct from the start. But at any time, you can then still control these permissions on the permissions page. And I think that covers everything. Thank you.